So the first rule of business is know your customer. So I decided, sitting in the room here today, this is a fairly technical crowd, so I'm not going to do the standard VC pontification kind of thing. It probably would not be well received. So I'll have a little bit of data to share with you guys to maybe frame things in terms of what's happening if you zoom out a little bit in the world of OpenStack. And the second part of knowing your customer is the cocktail reception is next. So I'll try to make this pretty brief and straightforward. So let's see. Well, let me just start by introducing myself. I'm Donald Fisher. I'm a venture partner at General Catalyst. We're a venture capital firm with offices here in Cambridge and Harvard Square, in Palo Alto, and down in New York. And our portfolio includes companies like HubSpot locally, was featured here today as a user. Stripe out in our Palo Alto office, Warby Parker down in New York. So a variety of sort of infrastructure and also consumer-facing startups. My focus is on early-stage companies on the enterprise IT side of the house. I've been in the venture world for about 6 years now. Before that, I actually spent 5 years at Red Hat during the scaling days there with John, among other folks. And there's a lot of analogs in terms of what's happening with OpenStack now and what was happening with Linux, in sort of like maybe the 99 to 2003 timeframe. So I almost, titled my talk "The Billion-Dollar Ecosystem," because if you look at the community that's forming around OpenStack, you can't even see the logos here. Just to give you a sense of the scale, I pulled these off of the OpenStack.org site. You see 8 platinum members, including really blue chip organizations, many of them represented here today, like HP and IBM, Red Hat. 18 gold members, 80 sponsor level members, and it took me a while to count all those actually. In the supporting members, there's almost 300 supporting members officially involved in OpenStack. So it's really, it's become a major force. I think we all appreciate it since we're inside of it, but just to zoom out and get the perspective, you don't see a lot of phenomenon like that happening in IT in just a couple of years. And it's also a billion-dollar ecosystem because there are a number of really significant organizations literally committing $1 billion to this initiative. So just to pick a couple of them, HP has been well represented here today, of course, with the HP Helion initiative. The company has announced that they're investing over $1 billion in their services in and around OpenStack, or with OpenStack as the foundation. And then, not to be left out, Cisco also made an announcement earlier this year about their own $1 billion initiative to stand up a set of cloud services, once again with OpenStack at the core. So, there were some interesting questions and discussions today about where are we in the adoption cycle for OpenStack broadly, how much of that is sort of vendor-driven versus customer-driven. So I have a couple of illustrative data sets maybe to look at here and to inform that discussion. So first of all, to look at sort of a leading indicator kind of metric, you could look at, this is Google Trends for a number of really recent relevant IT phenomena. So if you look at the yellow chart, the largest line represented there, you can see Hadoop, starting around 2007 and scaling to substantial levels today. And then for comparison, I put in a couple more recent breakout open source phenomena. So the blue line is MongoDB. You can see that sort of picking up in and around 2009, 2010. Node.js, which many of you I'm sure have seen, is one of the higher velocity application development communities out there. And the red line there at the bottom is OpenStack. So OpenStack really starting to take off in 2011. The project's about 4 years old now. And you can see that getting to some substantial scale in and of itself at this point. But also, if you kind of shift the time scale back, you can see it's on a pretty similar trajectory to these other phenomena that are pretty well accepted now. So that's, I mean, this is sort of like a measure of interest, right? This is basically people Googling for these things. So that's a leading indicator. You know, maybe a more telling data set is what I would call a little bit more of a trailing indicator, which is mentions in job postings, right? So this should, I think, get a little bit more directly at, you know, how much is OpenStack being considered or used by commercial organizations in a professional context. This is basically a sampling from this great site called Indeed.com that sort of aggregates job listings from all around the web. And you can, I plotted the same for series here so you can get the sort of trailing view. So the black line again is Hadoop, you know, getting to substantial scale there. You can see MongoDB is the blue line again, Node.js is the green line, and orange down there is OpenStack. And you can see sort of, again, starting to pick up. You can see that, it's interesting, you can see the delay between when the sort of Google Trends data hits in 2011 and when it starts to hit in Indeed in 2012. But really interesting is to look at the tail end of that time series, and you can see that in the last 12 months, it's really started to accelerate. And it's sort of the, you know, as a venture investor, it's the shape of the curve is sort of the thing that we're trying to pay attention to, not necessarily the scale of the curve. And I like the shape of that curve. So I think all of you guys are probably like the shape of that curve as well, since you're investing your time and energy in this ecosystem as well. You know, another legitimate question to ask is just like how big is the market here from a, you know, spend perspective? So there are, you know, a lot of people prognosticating on this topic as well. I picked, you know, one series of projections here from the 451 group, a great IT research organization, and they sort of peg the spend on OpenStack, the broader OpenStack ecosystem, including both service providers and technology providers, as approaching $1 billion this year, but you know, approximately doubling every 2 years, getting to something like, I think they project $3.3 billion. You can see here in 2018. It's also kind of interesting to note how their projection breaks down in terms of the different you know, components of that. The big blue part is basically service providers, so OpenStack-enabled service providers. But you can see from where we are today, relatively small portion. The red portion, I think, is basically the product part of this, or actually everything that's not blue is essentially product here. And you can see that it's growing from you know, fairly modest, what is that, you know, like $150 million total market size this year, getting closer to like $1 billion, you know, in 2018. And a lot of this, I'm not going to say worry, but curiosity about like when is all the noise converted into dollars feels very familiar to me from my time at Red Hat, right? So if you think back to what happened with Linux, you had, you know, 1998, 1999, Linux World, everybody there, and all the distributions, and Linux Care and VA Linux and Red Hat going public. You know, and the number of people at the Linux conferences doubling every year. It sort of felt a lot like the recent OpenStack summits, but you didn't have a lot of people actually monetizing that on the product side until about 2002, 2003 is really when Red Hat Enterprise Linux was introduced in the commercial package model. I think it was sort of a combination of both packaging it right and sort of having the insight in terms of how to provide the right set of capabilities. But there's also a technology readiness factor and also a customer education and customer readiness factor to that as well. It takes a little bit of time for this stuff to bake. It has to go through its proof of concepts. But if you sort of play that timeline forward, you know, that was 4 or 5 years into the real, you know, interest cycle around Linux. We're just about getting there on that time scale with OpenStack today. So, you know, what's going to happen? How is all this stuff going to sort out? I think an interesting question to ask is this sort of a winner-takes-all kind of dynamic around cloud platforms? My personal view is that it's really not. I think that there's actually going to be sort of multiple winners that sort of take advantage of different you know, natural communities or focus areas where they excel. So the way that I personally sort of project this to break out is that you'll have, a couple of vendors. Right now, Amazon Web Services and Google's Compute platform look like they are lead contenders in sort of the pure open public cloud kind of players, or public cloud pure players. Leveraging a lot of the early momentum there from the Amazon point of view, or a lot of the kind of technological capabilities from the Google perspective. I think VMware will very much continue to be a player, leveraging their install base, their footprint in the enterprise data center. So I think that they've demonstrated that they will, be a contender in the cloud platform area as well. Microsoft, often overlooked by the venture industry in Silicon Valley, has a very durable ecosystem. So I think, Azure is definitely gaining steam and starting to develop, has reached critical mass. So I see that, sort of sustaining into the future. And Microsoft can basically roll their existing ecosystem forward into the cloud era. But OpenStack is going to be, I think, the natural consolidator for sort of everybody else, right? You can go back to the first slide that I showed. You kind of see that community coalescing, all of those other vendors that are not those four sort of deciding to centralize their efforts and align their efforts around OpenStack. And that's because it is open source. It's sort of like open governed, right, explicitly. It's very much a multi-vendor product as a result. And it also spans both of these use cases, private cloud on premises, as well as enabling public clouds. So a final question is, you might want to think about, I certainly spent a lot of time thinking about, is where are the opportunities for entrepreneurship, for sort of new value creation in and around OpenStack? Where are the next companies going to come from, the important companies of this generation? So there's definitely a set of opportunities, maybe the first most obvious opportunities around being the OpenStack distributions. So there's certainly quite a kerfuffle going on right now to sort of scramble and see who's going to be the consolidators within the OpenStack world in terms of, that enterprise Linux kind of model of supported software distribution. I think there's a very interesting opportunity here around premium components within the OpenStack project ecosystem. You can see that popping up in a number of different areas. Some of the more interesting companies in the OpenStack community are companies like SwiftStack around the Swift component, the Swift storage component, or PlumGrid around networking, sort of addressing some of the software-defined networking or NFV questions that came up a couple times today through a more directly hardware-oriented model. And Tesora falls into that category, I think, as well, sort of being a premium offering, really nailing the challenges around leveraging both emerging databases like the NoSQL databases, as well as traditional databases in the OpenStack environment. There's also going to be a ton of other opportunities. In fact, you might look at the VMware ecosystem if you kind of want to see a preview of what can happen around the platform. There's, literally, dozens of significant companies providing management capabilities, monitoring. All the DevOps technologies are sort of intertwined with this, your Puppet Chef, Ansible, Salt, and so on. So all of those are going to be very relevant in and around OpenStack. The platform as a services sort of layered on top certainly seem to be have a role in this community as well. And then beyond the product opportunities, there are the services opportunities. So the public cloud hosting opportunity, and there's certainly, we have, a couple of those getting to scale now. There's a lot of services around deploying private clouds. So, companies like, like Mirantis here today and a number of others sort of supporting that. And then, as with any technology transition like this, there's going to be some really interesting services opportunities around both migration from the prior, status quo setup to this new model, as well as training there as well. So I think all of those are sort of, rich opportunities for, new businesses to be built around this OpenStack momentum. So that is it. Now I think we're moving on to the really good part of the day.
Indeed. Did anyone have any questions for Donald before we jump forward?
Hi, Donald. Hey,
Dion, how are you, sir?
good. Hey, what do you think is the monetization model that ultimately works best for the OpenStack ecosystem?
I mean, personally, I think that there's a pretty good model set by the open source data center monetization model that Red Hat established. There are a lot of parallels in terms of same buyers, similar dynamics around the vendor space. So I think and that model, which I think is often misunderstood as to be just services and support, really encompasses a lot more aspects of your traditional software license model, right? So even though the source code is available under an open source license, there's a lot of other things that customers really need to deploy the software. They need maintenance, so that kind of goes to the serviceability question, right? Who's going to patch the stuff and make sure that there's security updates, and that if you have a bug that's preventing you from deploying, that you can isolate that problem, get a hot fix for that without destabilizing everything else in your infrastructure by moving forward to the latest tip of tree open source version. There's other things that show up once you get to a greater scale, like indemnification around open source licenses and so on. I think what we saw at Red Hat was that when you put all of those other features of traditional software products into a bag under a subscription model, different people have a taste, an appetite for different elements of that. But you put enough of it together, it sort of consolidates the industry around one model.
Okay.
Do you agree?
Yeah. Maybe one more question, if anyone has one, before we move on to the next session.
Cool.
Great. Thanks,
All right.
Donald.
Yep. Thanks.
Appreciate it. Yep.